everything we've been through since September, I'm especially happy that we're gathered here. This is the Sunflower Community Room at Stonebridge Farm, and I want to tell you a little bit about Stonebridge. We are a 10-acre organic agricultural farm, community-supported agricultural farm. We are on the Ute Highway between Longmont and Lyons, which is along the front range of Colorado's Rocky Mountains. So that's where we're located. Stonebridge was established as a farm, a dairy farm originally, in 1911. So it's been around a good long time for this area. That's a long time. And Stonebridge became a CSA, a community-supported agricultural farm, actually the first one in Boulder County in 1992. So we're coming up to 23 years as a CSA, which is pretty exciting. This farm has a long history of practicing sustainable, local, small-scale agriculture. And John and I feel that we are now at a crossroads for ensuring that Stonebridge continues as small-scale, local, community-supported agriculture. So we're starting to take steps to make sure that Stonebridge will be around for a long time, and I'll talk a little bit more about that when I do my reading. Like Stonebridge, John and I also have farm histories from family farms or from growing up in communities where farming was predominant. So one reason that I wanted to read in this room, in particular do a reading in this room, is because there's a lot of history right here. There are things about this room you may not know, like it was a hog barn. You're sitting in a hog barn right now. And then it had chickens in here, and it had cows in here at one time. Some of you might remember when it was a machine and wood shop. Over here we had all the tools, and there was also storage. People are nodding their heads. And took several years, but we have transformed it into the community room that it is today, because community is really important, and we wanted a space where we could be together on days like today. So the Sunflower Room also has little pieces of history from my grandparents' farms, and I'll talk some more about those in my reading, but we have lots of farm events in this room. We have our pancake breakfast, we have our end-of-season Halloween party, we have old-time jams and concerts and knitting night and all kinds of workshops, viticulture, even writing workshops, because all of that is a part of what we think of as our agriculturalist mission at Stonebridge Farm. But one of the best things that we do here is potlucks. And we have just finished an incredible potluck. You all outdid yourselves again. Oh my gosh, what all did we have? We had several kinds of soups and all kinds of delicious bean dishes and rice, and I'm looking over here at everything that was so good. And I think potlucks are just kind of symbolize the kind of community that we have here. So I want to read a little bit about potlucks from A Bushel's Worth. And this is from the Toppings to Share chapter. And I have to put on my reading glasses. All right. In this country's rural history, agricultural communities were dependent on sharing and cooperation. Events like barn raisings and grain threshing were communal events where neighbors helped each other. They borrowed each other's tools, horses, and machinery. They met for quilting bees, butchering, and food preserving. After the work was done, sometimes before the work was done, someone brought out a fiddle and they danced and they sang along. The Little House books by Laura Ingalls Wilder, on which I was raised, have delighted generations of readers with heartwarming stories of a time when the fate of families and neighbors were joined by their common need for food, shelter, and community. In the highly individualized consumer culture of the United States today, sharing is a custom we rarely practice. Sharing is inconvenient. We want things when we want them. John says that moving is the last vestige of cooperation in our culture. We help each other pack, lift, haul, unload, load, unload, and unpack again. But after the work of moving is done, we're on our own. As consumers, we're supposed to purchase all the tools, technology, and goods we need for ourselves, rather than own them communally. We buy what we need rather than borrow it. That way, we don't have to be responsible for returning it. On the other hand, we hesitate to lend things because we're afraid we won't get them back. It's the ethics of sharing we've lost as much as the practice. An ethics that says we can cooperate on fulfilling our needs if we respect that one person's need is as important as the other. Since Stonebridge is a share the harvest farm in which the weekly distribution is based on the bounty of the field rather than the market value of the vegetables, our members share exactly what's ready to harvest each week. By August, when the high summer vegetables like tomatoes, peppers, squash, and eggplant are booming, members will need many bags to carry it all home. They also experience the diversity and seasonality of foods that grow in this region, from vegetables to fruit to herbs, and can expect something new each time they come to the barn to pick up their share. I know that we're spoiled at Stonebridge. Whoops. Our members give back the produce the land has offered by joining it with their culinary creativity at Stonebridge potlucks, like we've just shared. We find joy at this sharing, whether it's roasted vegetables with flavorful herbs, homemade bread warm from the oven, or something as simple as chopping mint on a raspberry and melon salad. And doesn't that sound good right now in February? Lots of people have their special potluck recipe. Gretchen always brings her delicious polenta dish topped with a medley of that particular week's vegetables. Deirdre bakes her sumptuous shortbread, the kind that melts in your mouth. Renee and Dave bring wonderfully flavored beans in addition to whatever innovative dish they've prepared from Stonebridge's weekly share. I'm especially enamored of the homemade cheese crafted by Lynn and Drew with milk from their own goats. Great food doesn't require hours in the kitchen, just some creativity and attention. The best food, to me, tastes of the fresh ingredients that went into the dish, prepared with care and shared with love. I know that we're spoiled at Stonebridge, that not everyone takes potlucking as seriously as we do. A friend and former bartering member who moved far away to a suburban neighborhood back east lamented the loss of Stonebridge potlucks. A potluck there, she found, meant deli takeouts in tiny containers, along with lots of hot dogs. What's wonderful about Stonebridge potlucks is the irresistible variety of food shared all at one meal. I love to take a little bit of everything in a sampler plate. Potlucks are beautiful too, the way homemade bread lies crustily on the handmade maple chopping block, hearty beans and vegetables bubble in earthenware casserole dishes, and the vibrant green, red, and yellow of butterhead lettuce and heirloom tomatoes, when they're in season, blushing in a vintage salad bowl. Meals like these are the community's way to feed each other with a little special effort, sharing some of the best of what we each have to offer. I always leave a Stonebridge gathering feeling not only full of food, but also full of new ideas for preparing the vegetables that we've grown. Each dish is an unexpected gift that extends the knowledge and talents of our community, and each meal the collaboration of sweet and savory dishes from many different family histories and cuisines. Like the fabled stone soup, you remember, where everybody brought a little bit of something to flavor the stones? Stonebridge potlucks create a feast much richer than what any of us could make on our own. With a little of this and a little of that, the sum is greater than the parts, because the food is shared with laughter and gratitude for how each has gone a little further to feed each other that day. Going a little further is a lesson seen in the natural world as well. Nature is not stingy with its gifts, but offers them when the conditions are right. Vita Sackville-West, best known as Virginia Woolf's companion, but a journalist in her own right, wrote of nature's prodigiousness in her gardening column for The Observer. She said, "I like generosity wherever I find it, whether in gardens or elsewhere. Henry Beston echoes the sentiment in his book, The Outermost House, which he wrote in 1928 as a chronicle of a solitary year on Cape Cod. Watching small fish attempt an inland migration from sea to brook, he wrote, "He began to reflect on nature's eagerness to sow life everywhere, to fill the planet with it, to crowd with it the earth, the air, and the seas." Beston was contemplating ocean life, but his words are true of seeds as well. Sowing seeds everywhere is one of the things nature does best. Nature is an indiscriminate giver, asking not to whom its gifts are given, but only for the chance to be received. The delivery may be random, or maybe not. But what lavishness comes of this offering should inspire us all. This is the harder lesson to learn from nature's graciousness, to give without expecting in return, to let the giving be enough. Our members have always appreciated nature's bounty. They know that a Share the Harvest farm also means that we get what we get. If the zucchini fail, which has unimaginably happened, no one gets zucchini. If hail ruins our crops, and I wrote, which has yet to happen, but in fact it did happen this year. We did have some significant hail damage, mainly on the tomatoes, so we lost the whole first round of tomatoes. So if hail ruins our crops, the shares or the tomatoes may be minimal that season. We offer no promise, no guarantee, no money back. Lucky for us, we may have had less than conducive conditions or a crop failure for certain vegetables. And here I wrote, we've never had to shut down the barn. But in fact, this year we did have to shut down the barn for one Saturday because of the flood, not because of flooding here at the farm, but because our farm was in a restricted access zone. There was a barricade and our members could not get to the farm. So we did not pick vegetables that Saturday, and it felt really, really strange and really pretty awful to not be able to do that. Luckily, we were back the next week. Our members trust us to do the best we can, and they're always happy to help, whether the problem be too much or too little. Members in the truest sense of belonging. They offer encouragement for our efforts in the fields, like the poem of magnet words I found on our barn fridge. It said, "Yes, go farmer, please homegrown, many better legendary harvest be always. We need organic love, good hope." When seeds scatter in the wind, they go a little further afield. When humans practice generosity, they go a little further too. The best sharing is when we give like nature does, freely and without expectation of return. We forget sometimes this ethic of sharing that lets the seeds fall where they will. So potlucks from time to time remind us that when we bring the best we have to the table, our sharing is the real reward. That's a very good one to read after you're really full from a wonderful poem. Well, because we're in the sunflower room right now, the former hog barn, now sunflower room, I want to read next from my chapter called Salvage. I don't usually read from this chapter, but I want to today in honor of my grandparents' farms. Many of the cool old things you see in this room came from the Smith and the Short farms in Williston, North Dakota. Like, for example, these doors over here came from the Short farm, all the moldings, these yellow light fixtures from the farm, all these old cans and buckets and things that you see along here came from those farms. And the Burma Shave signs, if you ask me later, I'll tell you what the jingles were for some of those signs. So these things have a new home here at Stonebridge, and I hope a very long home here. So I'm going to read from Salvage. All right. Granary, shed, tractor, truck, plow. That was the stuff of my grandfather's farms. My grandmother's farms were found in smaller objects. breadboard, coffee pot, and bottles of ivory liquid to wash the interminable dishes. For years before she had indoor plumbing, my Grandma Short had to draw water into a dishpan from a big red pump in the kitchen. Grandma Smith had running water out of a faucet, but she still washed her dishes in a dishpan so she could throw the water onto the flowers when she was finished. From my grandmothers, I learned the lesson, waste not, want not. My grandparents farmed in North Dakota during the Depression and World War II when money and materials were scarce. Even after those hard times were over, they never left that thrift mentality behind. Grandma Smith extended her diaries an extra year or even two by filling in the leftover spaces. "Never wrote here last year," one entry remarked. Grandma Short saved wrapping paper and old jars in closets under the roof's eaves. Although I never heard them say it, the World War II slogan, "Use it up, wear it out, make it do, or do without," describes their frugal, rural ways. But their thriftiness was a habit born of self-sufficiency rather than parsimony. Trips to town take time away from farming, so it's better to save what you had to use again rather than have to buy it new. Any little piece of wire could come in handy for fixing a broken fence or a lock. That leftover jar might be just the right thing for jam or pickles. Buy in bulk and stock up on sale so you don't have to run to the store. Grow your own food because it tastes better than what comes out of a can or a box, or they would refer to it as store-bought food. Make it yourself with what you have, and you'll be happier in the long run. When John bought Stonebridge, he found the previous owners had practiced the same kind of thrift. In the tractor barn over here, handmade drawers hold hundreds of old nuts and bolts that have come in handy more than once. My own make-do inheritance is most obvious in my hesitance to throw away a glass jar with a tight-fitting lid. I look at it thinking, what could go in this jar? And I imagine the day I'll need just that size as I stack them on the long shelf in the pantry. Boxes, too. I can't stand the thought I might not have the right size box handy when I need to mail something. And the pile gets too high and eventually necessitates a trip to the recycling center. I was horrified one day to find a new kind of soap that doesn't have a center because the company claims that part goes unused. They're wrong about that, at least on our farm. I love that little bit of middle of the soap. Raised during the Depression, my mother understands thriftiness in a way that combines use it up care with do without worries. It's hard to use the last one up, she says, when we find an expired can of soup on the shelf. Because my grandparents were successful farmers, my grandmother's lives weren't as harsh as they might have been, but they didn't have any frills for all their hard work. I've been lucky to inherit some of the trifles of my grandmother's lives, traces of the way they spent their days and the objects they used and cherished. From my Grandma Smith, I inherited a yellow Fiestaware bowl that she called her potato salad bowl, a cheery yellow, one of the bright colors that Fiestaware sold during the Depression. From Grandma Short, a beauty pageant winner, I inherited the rust and black beaded bakelite necklace she wore when she married in a rust-colored dress with a velvet collar. From both of my grandmothers, I have sewing notions. From Grandma Short, a round woven sewing basket, the top embellished with a long silken tassel and some small Asian coins, and a box of quilt scraps that she never pieced. From Grandma Smith, a sewing machine in a simple wooden cabinet, and an amber sewing case that held her needles and fine crochet hooks. Whenever I thread a needle, I think of her advice. Don't thread it too long or it will tangle. In other words, don't make more work for yourself than you have to. Another lesson in economy from a woman who knew how to make the most of what she had. As a child, I believed my grandparents' farms would remain, season after season, waiting for my return. But since my grandparents died, I've only gone back once with John, our daughters, and my Colorado family to salvage what we could of the short farmhouse before it was torn down. In rural North Dakota, abandoned farms are often used for illicit purposes, something we wanted to avoid. So for 2 days, we unwired Depression-era lights like these. And we unhinged paneled doors like those. We rescued what we could of our rural roots before the remains were sacrificed to the changing times. It felt strange to be in that house without my grandparents. Although their presence was everywhere, from the stove where my grandmother stood cooking to the mud porch where my grandfather processed raw milk in the stainless cream separator before taking it to my uncle's creamery. More than a decade after my grandparents' deaths, the porch still smelled like milk. Like any abandoned house, it seemed to wait for its owner's return, as if they'd just gone out for a drive and we would be home soon. A worn metal matchstick holder sat expectantly on the shelf next to the kitchen door. My father said I could take it if I would use it. So I slipped it in our tool bag with the hammers and crowbars. I didn't want to leave it there alone, and we are using it every time we light a fire in the wood stove. In the bare dirt basement under the kitchen, we found a green wooden step-back jelly cabinet with 2 tall doors on the narrow top part and 1 latch door on the deeper bottom section. Someone, maybe my Grandpa Short, had made this cabinet many years ago to hold canned goods. The paint gleamed with the old patina called primitive today. Not wanting to leave it to a demolition's fate, we strapped it on top of the doors and moldings in the truck for the long trip back to Colorado. As we left North Dakota with our load of treasures early in the morning, I watched the sun rise over the prairie as I bid farewell to my rural roots. With the long expanse of road and fields before us, new words to Down in the Valley played in my mind. The green rolling prairie, the grass a foot high, the wheat fields were waving as we said goodbye. I haven't been back to the farm since then, except in memory each day, as I smell the country air or hear a meadowlark trilling across the fields. Now those keepsakes grace the buildings at Stonebridge, transplanted reminders of my grandparents' self-sufficient lives on their land. Salvaging their farmhouses felt like desecration, but a necessary act all the same. What we left behind would have been stolen or destroyed or simply disappeared with time. But on the farm, we learned that desecration leads to resurrection. All matter is reshaped into another form. Compost becomes food for a new plant. Rotting logs sprout mushrooms for our dinner. Each trace of those farms has become something new here, something of use to this farm in some way. The wood moldings salvaged with crowbars and hammers have been cut and mitered around windows, doors, and walls, from the mudroom to the guest house to the sunflower community room. Shelves have been fashioned from that same wood, as well as frames for photographs of the people and places we love. The old mailbox waits in the rose garden for a letter or a bird to make a home. Sometimes I forget that my grandparents are no longer living, and that their farmland has been sold and the farmhouses destroyed. The realization of this loss is not only sad, but frightening. If those farms are lost, then ours could be as well. What will happen when John and I are too old or ill to farm anymore? Nature's response to our absence, I'm certain, would be to return to prairie grass within a single year. But since it seems all land must be owned, I worry that the land itself will be lost to development, as has most of the farmland along the 66 corridor. I'd rather have the entire 10 acres return to prairie rather than become another overpriced housing subdivision in Boulder County. Do you agree? But the best outcome will be for Stonebridge to remain a small farm. So John and I will take whatever steps we can to preserve Stonebridge for future generations. When I worry about the future of Stonebridge, I try to find reassurance in the old wisdom of the fields, the proverbs that guided my grandparents in their work. Make hay while the sun shines. Get to the root of the problem. Many hands make light work. You reap what you sow. And from Ecclesiastics, and thinking of Pete Seeger, to everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven. From these words came the rhythm by which my grandparents lived their lives. Follow the daylight and the seasons. Work hard in summer while the light is long and the weather mild. Rest in winter when the days are short and the nights very cold. Balance the necessary work with rest and renewal and regeneration. Each season, the land extends forgiveness, and we get to start over again. Salvaging the traces of my grandparents' farms seemed a betrayal to their way of life, like turning our backs on all they had accomplished, an admission we would no longer be stewards of their land. But salvaging promises a continuity of their lives on this farm, and with it, a hope that our land will remain rural. Waste not, want not. From my grandparents, I learned to make the most of what I have. From the land at Stonebridge, I'm learning to share the most of what I've been given. With our community's support, we will do what we can to protect the land so that Stonebridge can remain a small, organic farm for the next generation of farmers. As my grandparents did before us, let us use resources wisely by following nature's generous giving from the land to each other and back again. And you all are a part of that, and I hope you know that. Before I close, I want to say a few words about A Bushel's Worth, an eco-biography. I started writing the book 6 years ago by following our farm through the seasons. And then I expanded from there to include my family's farming stories. And by the way, this is a picture of my mom with her 2 sisters during the war. We call it the Victory Garden, but they always had a garden, not just during the war. And I also expanded with my own connection growing up on those farms and with our own Rocky Mountains here. As I wrote, I wove in my sense of urgency about protecting the natural world. And that sense of urgency started way back when I was in 5th grade in 1970, and we celebrated the very first Earth Day, and that became a chapter in the book as well. A recent review of my book on Amazon complained that there's no real narrative arc to this book. And I have to say that's pretty much true. There's no kind of edge of the seat, what's going to happen next kind of, plot kind of sense with the book. But the book does grow, does project, I think, our growing concern for the future of farming, not just our farm, but all farming, in the midst of climate change, which is a nice way of saying climate crisis, especially here in the West, where weather can be so big. And you all know that, because that's what we've experienced this whole last year. My publisher, Kirsten Allen at Torrey House Press, encouraged me to bring in more of my worries. And I told her that I would, but I didn't want to seem like a worry wart or like I was paranoid or something, which is kind of funny because I do tend to worry about some things, but maybe not the larger things. That conversation was before we had 2 seasons of really big worries. 2012, we had drought here, and we had fires all around us, and all summer we were constantly worried that somebody would throw a cigarette from a car or a spark from an engine, and we would have a huge fire here. So that was 2012, and I do talk about that in the book. And then there was last season, which you name it, we had it. We had those late frosts in the spring, and we had the big hail, and we had drought, and then of course we had this unimaginable flood last year. And that isn't in the book because the book had already gone to press, but I will talk about that elsewhere. So yes, as the book progresses, the reader is drawn into more of those challenges about farming that we face today. But at the same time that we're really worried about the future, especially this year with the river changing course and our irrigation, early irrigation being a little up in the air, even with all that, John and I are farmers, and farmers are just a hopeful bunch. One minute we're hoping for rain, and the next minute we're hoping that it stops. And we're hoping for a early frost or late frost, or we're hoping that the crops were really great and heavy, and then we worry that we're going to get it all into the barn, and we worry whether our members will stick by us. So I think farming is either the most optimistic occupation you can have or the most delusional. So one or the other. In farming, you work hard with hope in your heart until you can't work or you can't hope anymore. And that was the same in my grandparents' time and my great-grandparents' time. It really hasn't changed. Those of you who have read my book know that one chapter is based on my Grandma Smith's diaries and her really understated make do, appreciate what you've got, just work hard kind of ethic. For example, on January 29th, 1966, she wrote, "This morning, it's 40 below. So won't be very warm today." Like 40 below, doesn't that make you feel better about last week? It wasn't that bad, right? It really wasn't that bad. Recently, I was looking through my grandmother's diaries. I know, it's hard to imagine. That was before the wind chill factor even. I was looking through my grandmother's diaries again, and I found a poem that she had written shortly before my grandfather died, and she followed him 7 months later. So to end today, I want to share her very short poem because I think it portrays the kind of hopeful optimism that we feel at Stonebridge about our future on this land, the kind of optimism that says, could have been worse, and next year will be better. So this is a poem by my grandmother when she was 82 and still living on the farm. The garden's slow, and so are we. The winds do blow, but I hope it's rain instead of snow. Thank you. Thank you all. I'll have a few minutes to take some questions. Anybody have a question about Stonebridge or farming or anything?
Can you read more stories?
Well, I think I'll have to do that another time.
Are you getting, are people having you come and speak, or are you just starting? Because this is so interesting.
It is so fun to do it here. But yes, I've got more readings planned, and also something I called interactive readings, where I actually do some writing with people if they want to write, memoir writing as well. I try to give them some tips for that, and other kinds of eco-biography is something that I teach. So I've got a whole bunch of stuff continuing on from this. So it's been a lot of fun. Yeah. Tim.
Burma Shave jingles.
Yay, Burma Shave jingles. Okay, so first I should say that these Burma Shave signs that you see around here were saved by my Grandpa Smith, not in particular because they had Burma Shave jingles on them and would be of great historical value later, but because they had Burma Shave. And for those of you who don't know, Burma Shave was a shaving cream. It came in a jar and you lathered it on. That was before the days of shaving cream, And it was supposed to really, I guess, soften your face so that you could shave more easily. Joe? No, I like the beard. Anyway, so one way that they sold these, sold Burma Shave was they had a whole jingle contest, national contest, and people would come up with these jingles. And then the company would print them on boards along the highway. And this is back in the horse and buggy days and then very early days of of automobiles that didn't go all that quickly, so you had time to read, right? And so they would be up there for a year or so, and then the crew would come around the farm, and they would just throw down the boards onto the ground and put up the new boards. Well, my Grandpa Smith, right, thriftiness, he'd come along and say, that's a perfectly good board. I should take that and, do something with it. So these were actually found by my parents, right? Boarding up, pieces of the barn where he needed an extra board to just stick it up. That's where they were. And so my parents took them all down and brought them back when those barns were no longer needed. So that one up there that says no spare for that. The whole jingle said, pull to the side to fix a flat, save your life, no spare for that. Isn't that good? Because as cars started getting faster, the signs started to be not just about Burma-Shave, about the shaving cream, but about safety, really public safety. But this one here, special seats who scratch, that says scratch. That whole jingle said, and that's a very early jingle, you can tell because it's a yellow sign. Special seats reserved in Hades for whiskered gents who scratch the ladies. That's really good. That's really good. So we have those two jingles. There's a whole book you can get that has all the hundreds of jingles that they had over the years. And let me think, the very last jingle. Super highways, super speed. People have no time to read. Goodbye, Burma Shave. That was the last one. Yeah. So thank you for asking that. I bet you've always wondered why that said special seats who scratch. Michael.
Was the rodeo ground sign also?
Oh, that one. Is John Bell still here?
John left.
John
I wanted
left.
to thank him. He's
Oh.
the salvage guy here.
Yes, and in fact, salvage is our friend John Bell. That's his middle name. That came from up Allen's Park, because they used to do rodeos at Allen's Park, and he salvaged that for us, as well as these packing crates that he salvaged, and the trusses above us, and the wood stove, and so many things that John has brought us on this farm. Yes, Preston.
Can you say something about the recovery process from the flood? You said both the community and elected officials as well have been.
I'm looking at one of our elected officials right here, Sandy. Do you want to say anything, Sandy?
Well, the town is currently trying to make a long-term recovery plan. And
Michelle, where's
is
Michelle?
really involved in
Oh,
that
there
too.
she is.
It's part of our planning commission, but we've broken into 8 different key areas, and we're
1%.
working in groups, trying to come up with different projects and plans that will enable our long-term recovery process, and perhaps even enhance what we had in the town before.
Michelle, do you
But
want to
it's
add?
going to be a long process.
That's a really good point.
Yes, very inclusive, eight committees.
We need all the help we
We probably
can.
have something like 3 or 4 meetings every night of the week. Except for Friday, I think we ended up with nothing on Friday. But because we also, we have these 8 recovery committees, and then we also have 8 boards and commissions that are also doing their normal work that they do. So I'm on the planning board. And yeah, I mean, I think it's coming along, and the town is just really stepping up to the plate, and with a lot of help, we will get back on our feet.
I think we should thank Sandy too. The work that you did or are doing in those first few months of the flood. I hope everybody knows that Sandy was the person who really stepped into the breach. The mayor was gone, and the town administrator got sick, and Sandy's been working full-time uncompensated to keep the town together. Michelle as well, but Sandy.
Yes. I can't tell you how many times people have said to me, thank heavens we have the people that we have in charge. That's maybe part of why we're so optimistic, because we know we have really, really great people. But it is quite a process. It's just to go in and see the town ravaged as it was is very shocking. But it's looking great considering what we've been through. It's really coming back.
And
Really
one thing
strong.
that you
Yeah.
really spoke to me when you were reading about the barn raisings and everything, we have a huge volunteer group of which
Yeah.
I know Julie's a part of,
Mhm.
that's helping in people's homes, and they will be for the next several years, I think. They did a lot of the deconstruction and shoveling of mud and pulling out wet insulation and drywall, and now they're starting to rebuild and hopefully do landscaping in the spring. And
Yeah.
there's a
Ellen
whole
and John are
huge group,
chainsaw
yeah.
crew.
chainsaw.
Yeah,
crew,
Janelle's been
and-
doing all kinds of things.
So everyone in the community is stepping up to help each other and fill in what's needed. It's really been great.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
inspirational to see. And I would follow that up by saying, shop Lions.
Yeah, there you go.
Because our businesses took a huge hit, and so, go spend your money there, help them out.
Yeah. Yeah. So thank you for asking. And actually I didn't mention that the whole town was evacuated for weeks. That's an incredible thing. And who would have thought that could even happen in this day and age, that everybody in an entire town would leave and have to go somewhere else for quite a long time and then come back again. And we did it. Well, thank you all for coming. There's still more food over there. If you need another round, thank you all.